Welcome, everyone, to a Mexican and Redneck Follow the World. We are your hosts and surrogate fathers, Juan and Ben. Today we'll be discussing every interaction is important. So, we just had a little interaction before we started doing the podcast, which was, it's one of those things you don't think like, oh, that was actually really like a really important conversation. So it kind of makes sense as far as like doing this podcast now. So let's go into detail, Ben. Every interaction is important. Expound on that.
We're social creatures. We're made to talk to each other and interact.
And we want to thank everybody for listening to Mexican or Redneck Follow the World. That was the end of the podcast, guys. Yeah, that was it.
Interaction's over. That was important. Bye-bye.
All right, no, let's go into more detail as far as that.
So when you're marketing, every interaction's important. I find myself excited to tell people about our podcast. And this is just one example of many. But I'm excited to tell people about this podcast because I think it has a lot to offer. I think people could learn a lot from it. And of course, there's, selfish intent. I just want it to grow. But more so, I think we're really giving out some good advice that maybe could really help some people in their lives, with their families. And I find myself saying, hey, you should check us out. We just talked about dealing with the loss of a father, or we just talked about character development, or whatever the podcast may be. But I'm excited to tell people. And I was thinking, man, excitement's really, really infectious. People like it. They like hearing me talk about it just because they like the excitement, and now people are going, how's the podcast going? And I'm like, oh, wow. They just like that excitement. And I realized, wow, every interaction is really important. And you start realizing you can really affect people really positively and change their lives, or negatively. And I'll give you two examples. People will drive and go somewhere, right? And they'll have a bad interaction because someone will cut them off, and they'll get mad and feel justified. And they're like, and, give them the finger, screaming and cussing and putting all that negativity in the air. And that's a bad interaction. And, the other person sees you give the finger and they're screaming and cussing back at you. And that's, okay. So that's one way that could go. The other way is someone cut you off and they're like, oh, sorry, if they say sorry. And you're just, okay. That could have been a good interaction. And in that example, or those two examples, you have a good interaction and a bad interaction. And it's like you could have exercised grace and mercy for the person who cut you off, or the person who cut you off could have exercised humility. Why are you smiling?
I was thinking about this. So the other day I was driving around and I had this thought. I was like, man, what if how people would just wave at you when you're like going down the neighborhood, stuff like that?
Sure.
And I was like, what if I initiated the wave and like random people, but while you're driving? So when a car's passing you by, you just wave at them. You should do it.
I do it.
No, but if like just in the random street, like, like not your neighborhood, but outside of your neighborhood, like downtown, just drive at passing cars. It really freaks them out because they're like, some people will wave back to you and some won't. But then some people have this look like, you can tell like they're like, wait, do I know them? Who was that? And it just messes up their day.
Okay.
But then now you've created that interaction. So whenever you do run into that person, like, oh, you waved at me that one day. Who are you?
That's great.
Yeah.
I will be trying that very soon.
And that's pretty funny. So, but now you have a connection. It's like, oh yeah, you waved at me that one day. Who are you? So, anyways, I thought it was funny.
It was.
You got me thinking. You're talking about that. I was like, I don't know why I did it. I just thought it would be
just time to wave to folks.
Yeah, I just thought it'd be funny.
So you could be here at this podcast and give that example, and now people are gonna walk around just hi, just wave.
But do it from the safety of your car as you're driving
with the doors locked.
Yeah, doors locked.
Not at stoplights.
Not at stoplights.
You need to be moving.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, passing by. Yeah.
Few safety rules there.
Yeah, yeah. Because depending on what city or state you live in, it could be a different outcome.
Could be no bueno.
No bueno.
Yeah. So there was that interaction.
Sorry, I just hijacked her. You were saying a really good statement, and I just hijacked
I probably
it.
was.
You were. It was really good. I'm sorry.
Oh, but then okay. So going back to the driving analogy, or example, you have a bad interaction. Someone cuts you off. Well, you're giving each other the finger. You're screaming and cussing. And it's like, okay, you just exercised, hate, anger. You've put that out into the world, and you can never take it back. That's forever a part of that moment in time. And it kind of goes back to the podcast we just recorded, Character. Episode 63. If you haven't listened to it, all of you go listen to it again. And the idea that your life is a movie, and if you play it back, are you going to like every interaction you had? Probably not. It's kind of impossible. But could you like most of them and know that you tried to have the best possible outcome? And that's the whole idea, is you're going to have bad interactions. You're going to have good interactions. But I've found that if you're kind, polite, positive, you're trying to exemplify good character, good attitudes in every situation, my life goes so much better. It's just so much easier. People around you are willing to show you grace and mercy because they realize this guy's just having a problem, or he's confused, or he knows what's going on. I want to be a part of this. Versus, well, he's angry, he's difficult to work with, I don't want anything to do with this guy. Because I've been grumpy before, and people have just been like, well, I'm going to go the other way. and rightfully so. Nobody wants to be around someone who drags them down. And so that was the whole thing, is you can really affect people. And then being on the receiving end of that, okay, we can put out positivity. You ever just been somewhere and you have an interaction with someone you've never met before? And they're like, hi, how are you doing today? And just everything about them brightens your life. You're like, you were so nice. I want to come back to this store just because you were nice to me.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. I've had that interaction. Several years ago, I was doing this sales job, and it was basically, but I was having to drive all over the state. And I remember stopping outside of Birmingham at a little Starbucks, and I ran into this older gentleman, and I'm probably never going to see him again. But I remember having a conversation. Somehow we got struck a conversation, and it was probably about a 10-15 minute conversation. But it was such a powerful moment, because it was like some part of me knew, like, oh, I was supposed to be here at this time, at this moment, to impact me in this positive way. Like, he just gave me this bit of encouragement. And in a way, it was almost like a father figure waiting for me at that point to encourage me at that point in time.
Whoa.
I'll never run into him again. I don't even remember his name, but I remember the moment. I remember the time. And because of that interaction, that part of the country, that area, it's like, oh, this is where I was encouraged.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah. And it may be that one interaction. And I know I've been bummed out and someone's been nice to me before, and it's just totally brightened my day and changed my whole perspective and really helped me. And that person will never know that I was bummed out, and I just needed that little interaction.
And the crazy thing about that's it. Because the man didn't know he was helping me. He was just being nice. He was just being friendly. But he wasn't going out of his way to try to help me or give me advice. It was just him being him was super uplifting.
Yeah, and so from that one interaction, imagine how much more effective and better we could be as people towards each other if the people we see regularly are people we're encouraging like that constantly. Like, you don't have to go up to people specifically and be like, hi, Juan, how are you doing? And, be normal. But if you're showing this consistent pattern of positivity, the people around you are going to go, man, that guy's just always positive.
Yeah.
He's always happy to see other humans versus someone's, a Mr. Grinch.
Yeah. Which, it's funny, man, because I really hope that this podcast is like that for people, to where I guess because our goal is to try to help people, but at the end of the day, really, you and I have talked about how we really just want this podcast for us to help us become better dads, and we're just kind of inviting people along for the journey. And we're gonna have bad moments, we're gonna have bad days. We're some recording sessions are better than others, and some weeks we're in between the podcasts are better than others. But it's I think as we go through this journey, it's definitely been helping me out become a better person. And so we're not here trying to be like, oh, listen to us because you're going to be so much better because you listen to us. Like, no, we hope you get something out of it. And if you don't, it's okay. But if you do, yay! 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 So that's, which I'm like, man, this is, it really gets me thinking too about the interactions that we have on a daily basis, Ben, because sometimes we think that an interaction may not be for you. You may have a specific interaction that happens in your life, but it's not necessarily for you. And even with the podcast now, you're going to have interactions to where you're going to come back and tell that story, and that happened to you because somebody out there in the audience needed to hear that interaction that you just had. You didn't necessarily need to have it, but there's somebody out there in Australia that's having a bad day, which a lot of people in Australia are having a bad day right now, but we're praying for y'all. But then they're like, oh, I needed to hear that, which I'm like, oh, that's pretty exciting. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of the idea for doing a podcast, because people would say, oh, that was a good perspective. Oh, I really like the way you said that. I've never thought about it that way. And I kind of started thinking maybe I have something worth sharing. Maybe it's worth making a podcast. And I can't tell you how many times I've listened to other podcasts or YouTube videos or whatever, and someone's just talking like this, but it's so helpful to me, and they'll never know they helped me. Or someone puts a little bit of wisdom in a song, and I just hear it driving to work one day, and I'm like, that was a great bit of wisdom. I'm really happy they shared it with the world. And they'll never know that they helped me, and probably many other people, but they were willing to share it. And it's like, man, what if I could, make my interactions count every time? Mm-hmm. What if my life was a little more calculated in that I'm trying to put more positivity than negativity into the world, and make the world around me better? Because if everyone's making the world around them better, the world would be a pretty nice place.
Yeah. Yeah. It really gets me thinking too, even like when tying in the last podcast that we talked about, as far as like, going back to what kind of movie, what kind of TV show are you recording, or what kind of TV show you're living in. But the interactions that you're living with somebody, because at one moment, oh, they're just an extra in my movie set. They don't really matter at this moment. But what about down the line when you run into that person again? But now he's the main character, and you're the supporting role. But he's going to remember how you treated him when he was the extra, and you were the main character. And not necessarily in that way. If he does, that's kind of cool.
I've had that experience though, where you meet someone, or you talk to someone, or hang out with someone, and they tell you something about yourself that you've almost completely forgotten.
Really?
Yeah.
Expound on that.
I don't want to. No. I'm just kidding. I will. He has a gun pointed at me right now. No.
I do. Actually, I do. It's pointed straight at your head.
Good.
It's right there.
Very good. It just happens to be on a shelf.
Yeah. Yeah, thank God.
And he's not holding it.
It's not in my hand. Yeah.
No.
We're practicing really good trigger finger safety protocol right now.
I wonder what a podcast would be like if people had guns pointed at each other.
If we were just holding guns the entire time,
Just each guy has a gun pointed
well,
at
we
each
would
other.
probably
It's like,
not
what
be able
would
to. We would definitely not be able to put that on YouTube. That's for sure.
What would you talk about? What would they talk about? I wouldn't be a part of it. Maybe you might.
Man, have you ever watched those old Western movies like that where the guys are like literally just?
You just got a gun.
No, there's a skit. There's a skit by Keenan Peele where like the gangsters they become best friends, but then they live their entire life just pointing a gun at each other. You seen that? Oh, you gotta watch it. It's hilarious.
Those
it's so
guys
funny.
are hilarious.
Yeah, they're funny. They're funny.
What happened?
You were talking about your point interaction that you made, and that it later impacted you. Like, got
Oh,
somebody
one of
that
my
said-
cousins. Him and I recently saw each other at a funeral,
Mhm.
and he was telling me a story about myself. He's like, I remember hanging out with you and listening. He told me about some music or something we were listening to, and I was like, I forgot I used to listen to that band.
Mhm.
And we were teenagers. This would have been 20 years ago. And he was telling me about when we were teenagers and how he always 20 years ago. I can say that. 20 years ago I would be 16.
That's crazy.
But he would tell me about, I remember when you were listening to this band, and he started telling about all this stuff, and I was thinking, I don't remember doing that. I don't remember that part of the movie that I was in. But he saw it as a positive thing. He told me about movies I was talking about that I had just seen, and all the stuff we had done that day, and I just kept thinking that day happened. I kind of remember now. Yeah. And to me, I remember hanging out with him. I remember enjoying him being around, but I don't remember all the stuff he was saying. But that interaction was positive to him. And at this funeral, when we were reminiscing, that's what he was reminiscing about when I walked up to him and started talking to him. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Like, yeah, especially because I've had that experiences like that, where family members used to know you when you were younger or a different stage of life, but years later, they're like, "Oh, you're a completely different person." Like, yeah, which it strikes me to think that we were teenagers 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And like my friends, when I was a teenager, if they ran into me now, they'd be like, they would have no clue who I am. Like, oh, you're not the same person at all. Like, no, I'm not. You have 4 kids. Yeah, I do. My dad. I tell dad jokes now.
Tell dad jokes. You have a dad podcast.
Yeah.
You have a dad cast.
Dadcast.
We should have called this the Dad Cast.
No.
No.
Mexican and Redneck Follow the World is so much better in every single way.
It is. It is.
It says everything about us.
But if we inspire enough people, maybe there will become a category of Dad Cast.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
That
I
could be
like that.
cool.
I like that.
Maybe we could just like work it into a website
All right.
or something.
So we can keep on playing on this, but let's close this podcast out. first.
Yes. We want to thank everyone for listening to a Mexican and a redneck father of the world. We love you and we're proud of you.